a.m., a swarm of 34 Ukrainian drones screamed toward their target at 300 miles per hour. In 45 seconds, they would strike at the heart of Russia's air strategy, the largest Shahed drone factory, a production line that churns out dozens of attack drones a day. For weeks, Russia had celebrated the Valuiki factory as a symbol of its industrial might. Its defenses, a multi-layered network comprised of Nevo-M and Panzer S-1 systems, were considered a formidable multi-layered defense system. So confident were they that Russian commanders reportedly held barbecues outside the facility to celebrate the record production numbers. What they didn't know was that Ukrainian intelligence had been investigating them for 3 months. Analyzing more than 2,000 hours of satellite imagery, they found a single critical flaw. The inexperienced night shift crew operating the pier battery had a habit of seeing tiny, low-altitude radar returns like migrating birds. The plan was audacious: wait for the moon's haziest night, fly low, and look like a bird. The stakes were high. Success meant crippling 70% of the Shah's production, effectively blinding his aerial strategies for months. Failure meant the loss of a drone swarm worth millions of dollars and an embarrassing propaganda victory for Moscow. But just as the plan was nearing completion, Ukrainian intelligence received a dire update. Russia had reinforced the facility with a new 96L6E mobile radar system, operated by an experienced crew ordered to shoot down anything that moved. So how did you infiltrate a newly repaired steel fortress with its only known weakness? At 3:17 a.m., 60 miles from the border, in a cramped mobile command vehicle, Ukrainian operators began their attack under the cold light of FPUPO monitors. Orders blared through their headsets, working in perfect harmony. Stay alive. Go, go, go. First came the killers, 34 drones. Ram 2X2s rose into the night, immediately dropping to 100 feet and using the thick Belgorod fog as natural cover, but they did not fly directly at their target. They were the second act in this play. The first act was completely deceptive. 10 more British-made B-Jet 80 drones streaked across the sky at high altitude, emitting a massive simulated radar footprint, equivalent to a fleet of Su-100s. This is the oldest trick in the book, making the enemy look left while you attack from the right. This symphony of mayhem was conducted by a custom I called Night Owl. He processed real-time data from the ORQ-20 Puma reconnaissance drone circling invisibly at 15,000 feet. He factored in crosswinds blowing at 15 miles per hour and adjusted the flight path of every drone in the fleet accordingly. The human factor was very important. The operators were not just passengers, but pilots ready to take manual control at a moment's notice. Angle 15. Watch the bloom on the radar, an operator shouted, his hands gripping the controls firmly. Time was now ticking. The veteran Russian crew had exactly 7 minutes to cross the kill zone and reach the factory before they could discern the real threat of the ghost planes. Food was purchased at 3:19 in the morning. Inside the Russian command bunker, the seasoned commander saw exactly what he wanted the Ukrainians to see. 10 U-27s screaming toward his position on the main tactical display. Engage all primary targets, he shouted over the radio. Burn them! The Piran-1 system roared into life. In less than 30 seconds, a barrage of missiles had knocked 6 Banshee targets out of the sky in spectacular fireballs. On the screen, incoming threats were being eliminated with ruthless efficiency. The Russian crew was performing flawlessly. Confident in the superiority of his system, the commander gave rapid orders. Repelling the clumsy Ukrainian airstrike, he thought he was playing Call of Duty on easy, but this was a calculated sacrifice. Inside the Ukrainian command vehicle, the operators watched as the symbols or glowers on their drones went dark one by one. Their job was done. Anna had bought the herd 30 valuable seconds of chaos, but the easy part was over. The Russian commander who smelled blood wasn't celebrating, he was hunting. After the ghost planes were gone, he ordered his operators to scan all frequencies and all altitudes. He knew there was still something out there. The element of surprise was gone. The main flock of Ram-2X drones had less than 5 minutes to reach the factory before being detected by an experienced crew on high alert. By 3:21 a.m., the Russian commander was furious. He knew he had been tricked, and now the experienced crew was scattering the skies with everything they had at hand. The 28 remaining Ram-2X drones were about to be exposed and destroyed. But the Night Owl AI had already predicted this. It launched a new tactic called Phantomo. It didn't try to hide the drones, it hid them. The flock instantly split into 3 smaller, irregular groups. Flight programs using biological data from the Belgorod forests had begun to mimic the complete flight patterns of large migratory birds. Now, to the young Russian crew operating the Panair's main console, target symbols that posed a severe threat were transformed into smooth, non-threatening biological reflections. Simultaneously, the RQ-20 Puma at 15,000 feet released a special infrared decoy. This was not designed to fool a missile. It was intended to blind the Panzer's ground-based optical cameras. The intense glow of the false decoy was scattered by the thick fog, creating a blinding target on the Russian operator's visual display. The fog, which had been expected to be Russia's friend, had now become a weapon against them. An operator shouted inside the Ukrainian carriage, "Blind men, now come through the gap." They were exploiting a 15-second window of confusion they had discovered during surveillance, namely the moment of short-term inefficiency that occurred during the shift change at 3:10. It worked for a moment. The young crew, flushed and disoriented, reported that the sky was clear, but the experienced commander was not looking at the main display. He was monitoring the raw data stream on the new 96LL6E backup radar. This system was more sensitive, designed to find a needle in a haystack. Or it saw through the deception, saw wolves among the sheep, and was about to unleash hell. At 3:22 a.m., the seasoned commander refused to play their games. He was like a chess master ignoring the sacrifice of a pawn to see directly checkmate 3 moves away. On the backup radar, the 96LL6E drew a box around the blurry bioreflections and manually marked them as enemy. He then fed this raw targeting data directly to the Panzer missile launchers. The response was ruthless and instantaneous. 4 Ca-22 missiles were launched from their tubes, each accelerating to a speed of 4,000 feet per second. The seekers locked onto the 12 designated drones, but as the Ukrainian operators prepared to initiate pre-planned evasive maneuvers, a new and unpredictable enemy attacked from the sky itself. A severe wind shear formation blowing at 40 kilometers per hour disintegrated. On the FPS screens, the horizon suddenly tilted sharply. The AI struggled to compensate, but the energy was too sudden. 3 drones that could not correct themselves in time collided with each other. They did not just fall, they evaporated in 3 medium-height fireballs. As red warning lights blared on the operators' consoles, 3 icons simply disappeared. And worst of all, the 4 incoming missiles were still screaming at them. They were now fighting on 2 fronts: in the air against Russian steel and from below against the raw, unpredictable force of nature. The commander's voice echoed through the Russian command channel with triumphant laughter. Their tricks were over, he declared. He was right. Their planned responses had run out. With nearly half of the remaining strike force about to be wiped out of the sky, the mission hung by a single frayed thread. At 3:23 seconds before 4 missiles struck, the mission was over. The plan had failed. The AI had exhausted its pre-calculated solutions. This was now in the hands of the operators, but they still had one last desperate card to play, a borrowed bit of American genius. Their Ram-2X was equipped with a miniature 050 flare, the same system used to protect F-16 fighter jets. This is not just a flare, it is an electronic lie. The drone emits a radar and thermal signature 100 times greater and more attractive than its own. This is the matador waving a huge red cape in front of a bull charging towards him. As the operators pressed the deploy button, 4 flares opened up behind the target drones. 4 SAW-22s, which had been fixated on what they thought was an easy target, suddenly saw a much more attractive target. Their internal logic made an instantly fatal decision. As they chased the phantom signals, they were violently shaken and exploded harmlessly 1,000 feet away in 4 enormous empty fireballs. Over the Russian command channel, the triumphant laughter had turned to stunned, furious silence. He was no longer a hunter, he was a spectator to a massacre. With the last threat eliminated, the Ukrainian operators gave their final orders. The flock split into 3 designated strike groups, 1 for the main assembly shop, 1 for the components warehouse, and 1 for the central control building. And the Nightbird AI, in a final act of brilliant opportunism, used the 25-mile-per-hour wind that had nearly destroyed them, like a gale, to accelerate the remaining drones into their final attack run. Every Russian defense had been breached, every ruse foiled. The path to the factory was now completely clear. The Ukrainian operators' final command was not a shout, it was a cold, silent approval. Weapons clear, send. The remaining 31 Ram-2X drones flew their final attack profiles. They not only landed, they became precisely guided. The GPS-in systems locked onto the factory coordinates with a margin of error of just 3 feet. The first drone not only slammed its 15-pound shaped charge into the roof of the main assembly shop, it also punched through the roof, punching through 6 inches of reinforced steel, and exploded directly above the Shahed 136's main production line. One by one, the rest of the pack continued to pound the components warehouse and central control building in a perfectly synchronized and destructive rhythm. But the real stroke of genius was not in the strike itself, but in the science of the explosions. The fuse on each warhead was set with a 0.8-second delay. This was a major step forward, designed to maximize the pressure wave in a confined space. It was like the difference between a firework exploding in an open space and a firework exploding inside a steel barrel. The result was a catastrophic pressure wave of 30,000 yas that rippled outward, shattering every sensitive electronic component and circuit board within a 50-meter radius. Steel columns designed to support a roof buckled like tin cans in a coordinated internal explosion. The entire ceiling caved in, leaving over 200 near-complete witness drones under tons of twisted metal and concrete. In the control room, the secondary explosion obliterated every server. 3 months' worth of production data, logistics programs, and schematics were erased in less than a second. Russia's favorite drone factory was no longer a factory, but a tomb of scrap metal. Maybe they could sell it to buy a new radar screen for their commanders. Air raid sirens sounded in Valuiki, but it was too late. Damage had been done. On the ground, FSB agents swarmed the scene as they desperately tried to control a disaster they could no longer hide, and chaos erupted. A 1,000-foot-tall plume of black smoke billowed into the dawn sky like a giant tombstone marking the grave of Russia's drone targets. The numbers coming in were grim. 70% of the entire production line had been destroyed. Russia's top 15 drone engineers and 30 workers had been wiped out. A satellite confirmed a pass at 4 a.m., verifying that the destruction was approved. Images showed a 20-foot deep crater where the main assembly shop had been located. The mission was not just successful, it was annihilation. But the real damage was measured not in twisted steel, it was in the strategic shockwave that engulfed the entire Russian war effort. This was not just a raid, it was a decapitation blow. First, the production line that fed Russia's eyes in the sky was disrupted. Russian troops in Donetsk had relied on these Shahed for reconnaissance all along, but now they were flying blind. This set a terrible precedent for the Russian command. Coming just weeks after the Windy War Cascade attack, which crippled power grids on the Volga, this strike demonstrated that none of its high-value strategic assets were safe. The Ukrainians were no longer simply defending themselves, but reaching hundreds of kilometers deep into Russia and systematically dismantling its war machines piece by piece. While Moscow, paralyzed by indecision and trying to understand how they had been hit so soundly, Ukraine took advantage of the 72-hour window of confusion to launch 5 new offensives in the Kharkiv sector. In the Kremlin, the question was not just about a ruined factory. A commander was reported shouting at a secure briefing, "How do they keep getting here?" That night, with a handful of drones and a brilliant plan, Ukraine demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Victory belongs not to the largest army, but to the sharpest mind. Oh, the Russians learned a bitter lesson, especially after drinking their coffee, never to invite the Ukrainian drone unit to play chess. This operation was a watershed that redefined the nature of modern warfare. With this strike, Ukraine did not just target a factory, but the heart of Russia's war strategy. Night Owl AI combined human intelligence and algorithmic intuition into a single beat to overcome traditional air defenses. Now, in warfare, it was no longer the range of weapons that was decisive, but the range of intelligence. The Valuiki strike resulted in the collapse of the Shahed of Russia's largest production plant, demonstrating that Ukraine has become a striking force not just defensive, but with strategic depth. This heralded a new era in which the concept of air superiority was being replaced by data superiority. On the Russian side, on the other hand, panic and disbelief reigned. The commanders who believed in the invincibility of the Nevom and Panzer systems paid a heavy price for being overly confident in their own security. The Ukrainian attack turned into a game of wits that left classical military reflexes in despair. It was like facing a brain that was playing 3 moves ahead on a chessboard. Even nature played a role in this war. The moment when the 40 kilometers per second wind changed the course was a reminder of how unstable the balance of war is. However, Ukrainian operators turned this coincidence into an advantage. Human intuition turned out to be even sharper than the cold calculations of the algorithm. In conclusion, the attack on Valuiki was not just a physical destruction, but a psychological revolution. Russia's eyes in the sky were blinded. The nervous system of his war machine was paralyzed, and the world saw once again that wars are no longer won by the largest armies, but by the sharpest minds. This story was not just the destruction of a factory, but a statement of the changing times. Now it is no longer tanks, but algorithms. It is no longer generals, but intelligence networks that fight. And tonight he sent not only his drones into the Ukrainian sky, but also the model of war of the future. If you are as interested in strategic stories, military analysis and behind-the-scenes mind games of modern warfare as we are, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the Military Chronicle channel, because behind these stories there are not just explosions, but decisions that change the course of history.